time now to unpack some of that good news that we were talking about earlier. Motorists can breathe a sigh of relief as the petrol price has decreased by at least 94 cents a litre, diesel by a bit less than that, and of course paraffin as well, and all of that happening at midnight last night. However, it's still what some would call an emotional experience, filling up your tank at the pumps and seeing all those digits go up as the petrol attendant fills up your tank, and the petrol price is subject to market fluctuations and international pressures as well, and it might go up again. And I think this is where some of us become so skeptical. So why does the fuel price go up and down? So we are joined now here in studio by Sanisha Pikrasamy, who's going to help us unpack this. She's an economist at Momentum Investments. Sanisha, thanks so much for coming through. So that's the question, the million-dollar question. Yes, we're happy. We are breathing a sigh of relief that the petrol price going down by almost R1. But at the same time, we already start thinking in the negative about this might go up again. Is that normal?
Thanks for having me, Sakina. So there are three main elements to the fuel price. The first is the taxes, and that is really decided on a domestic basis, but we also have two other elements which are largely exogenous. So by exogenous, I mean they are externally driven and has nothing to do with the domestic economy. So the one would be the rand-dollar exchange rate, and the second would be the international price of oil. Now, on the international price of oil, it really depends upon the demand and supply imbalance that there is currently that has been created. So what that means is that we've got more supply of oil on the market relative to demand, and in the last month, we've actually seen prices come down again because of that excess of supply relative to demand. So in the US, for example, we had quite a big boom in West Texas in the US, and that's basically put on some more oil supply relative to very weak global demand. And we know that global demand is quite weak at the moment, again, because we've got the US-China trade war playing out. We know that central banks across the world have also become very bearish on growth and are starting to look at potentially cutting interest rates. And that negative dynamic and rhetoric that's playing out in the market has essentially caused global demand to weaken, and we've actually seen oil prices fall on the back of that.
So are we right to be worried that, we're seeing this decrease, but that we could then potentially see all of that clawed back in the next month?
So again, it depends on where the rand-dollar exchange rate goes to and whether we'll see a further increase in the oil price. What we saw out of the main exporting nations that export oil, the OPEC region, they've basically decided to continue with supply cuts in order to buffer up the oil price. If they don't do that, it means that the oil price could fall even further. So with that going forward, we would have to also see what happens to the rand exchange rate. And again, that depends on domestic politics. It depends on international geopolitical risks. It depends on whether there is risk sentiment out there for emerging markets. That all plays a role in determining the rand exchange rate.
So precious little we can do about those external influences, but is there anything that we could do as consumers to basically, buffer ourselves, protect ourselves from these fluctuations? Because going down by almost R1 now, but we don't know what's going to happen in the next month or two. So is there anything that we can do practically?
So just to give you a bit of an idea of the cost saving that's involved here, if you have a car and it's about 45 litres of petrol that you use to fill that vehicle, you're basically going from around 680 that you fill in your tank now from a month before, which was 40 Rand more. So you're basically having 40 Rand worth of savings. Now that's 40 Rand in the consumer's pocket that you can decide to buy other necessities. You can decide to bring your level of debt lower, or you can decide to save. And I think in this current environment where consumer headwinds are still very strong, the consumer needs to be very conservative with these savings. So in light of that, I think consumers still need to look out for those bargains. They still need to look out for discounts. If you can buy in bulk and obtain a discount with that, I think it's a good idea. Remember that in this environment, it's also quite important to be price sensitive. So consumers, if you do online shopping, for example, it's much easier to compare prices between various supermarkets and get the best price possible. Those are savings that can either accumulate in your account, or you can actually bring your debt burden down. Again, we know that middle-income consumers are exposed to loans that have higher interest rates, and that again is money out of the consumer's pocket.
But But is that realistic? I'm sitting here and I'm listening to you, and yes, it sounds as though this is what we ought to be doing. But just yesterday we were talking about municipal rates and taxes going up. So yeah, I might save 40 Rand on filling up my tank, but I've got all these other prices skyrocketing. So your municipal rates and taxes. How does the consumer then balance all of these things? As an economist, what would you advise me to do?
Zakina, you're quite correct. So we've had electricity prices, for example, by the city of Joburg, likely to go up 13%, property rates up 5.5%, sewerage rates up 7%, water rates up 10%. So these administered prices are still eating away at the consumer basket. I think as a consumer in South Africa, we need to realize that necessities have to take priority, and we do have to cut back on some of the luxury goods that we want to consume. Again, it's very important for consumers to save for the rainy days such as this, when consumer headwinds are very severe, and we have to cut back and really tighten our belts at this point in time.
But you see, Sanisha, that's where we take issue with you guys telling us to save. Because I'm saving 40 Rand, and this is just as an example, but then I'm going to fork out more elsewhere. And people always say, we don't save, not because we don't want to, we don't save because we don't have the money to save. Do you think that's a fair reflection for most South Africans?
In South Africa, we do face very high rates of inequality, and living expenses have increased in the last couple of years. So if we look at a measure which we call GDP per capita, it basically tells us the living standards of South Africans, and these have dropped for the last 4 years. So again, consumers have been facing enormous headwinds over the last couple of years, but it really does boil down to accurate budgeting, making sure that you consistently save over a long period of time. Again, for the youth, it's very important in South Africa to save for your retirement. We often find that people get on later on in life and find that they don't have enough savings for their retirement. So a little bit every day does actually help in the end.
Sanisha, we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much for coming through. And Sanisha Pakrisamy, who is an economist at Momentum Investments, talking to us about the petrol price, which decreased last night or at midnight. So this morning, if you're filling up, you may see that there is some relief there for you at the pumps. So we'll continue talking about matters around the economy. We'll talk about saving as well a little more, as July is National Saving Month. So don't go anywhere.